Hello guys, it's Jonathan here doing another BakuTech discussion. This time, I'll talk about the BakuTech decks we should have gotten. So, during BakuTech, there were 12 decks, at least in the main line, which is what I'll be covering, the BTD decks. Now, of these 12, I think they were mostly pretty good, but I feel like there's a couple alterations you could make, and also add in a few extras, and make the line a lot better. Now for this video, I will go over the alterations to each deck, which shouldn't take too long. I'll go through those pretty quickly. But there are a few new decks I also want to make. Also, I will say, I won't be talking about the champion deck at all. I don't think that really needed to be a mainline deck, but if you want to count it, then it just would go between BakuTech Season 1 and BakuTech Gachi. So anyways, let's go ahead and get started with the actual main part of the video. So first up here is the Team Dragon deck. The first one with Flare Dragon, Van Falco, and Destroy Minicus. This one would be the exact same. All I could say is to put a bigger emphasis on Flare Dragon being the main Bakugan in the deck, but I feel like they already kind of did that, so it works fine as is. Next up we have the Shadow deck. So the Shadow deck is interesting. So another deck that just kind of exists. There isn't really a main Bakugan to this deck, but if you had to assign one, I'd probably give it to Well Gallo. However, I think it should be assigned to Borg Mahesis instead. This will make the main Bakugan of the deck Darkus. I'll come back to why this is the case in a little bit, probably between BakuTech Season 1 and BakuTech Gachi. But I do think Borg Mahesis should have been the main Bakugan in this deck. It wouldn't have to be crazy, again it's meant to be the entire team, but that's the Bakugan I think should have gotten the most focus. Moving on to the Rise deck, this would be the exact same, absolutely zero changes. Now for the Hollow deck, this one's interesting because I'd keep the Bakugan the exact same. Yes, I know Shinazuchi and Michael Laurel aren't very good, but that's not the point of this video. So, the one thing I would change is actually the crosspiece. Both this and the Rise deck get the Pyrus crosspiece. I think this should have gotten the Darkest Soul piece for Sextagonal. I think that would have made a lot more sense, so that's the only change I'd make here. Next up we have the Shield deck. I think this is also just fine as is. I don't think there's anything new to really add here. I believe this already comes with the Chaos Soul piece, so again, nothing really of note here. And now we have the Tri deck, our first new deck here. So yeah, I think the Tri deck should have been a counterpart to the Shield deck, and also just should have existed. Yeah, Trifalco didn't get its own deck for some reason. It was just released on its own. It did come with its own Sextagonal piece, which by the way, should have been the Ventus Soul piece here, which I know takes away from the Wind deck, but we'll get back to that. But yeah. I think this should have the Ventus Soul piece. Should have gotten a deck. So as far as the other Bakugan in here go, obviously they'd be new. So as far as what I'm going for, I'm not going to give exact, ideas for these Bakugan. I'll just give some concepts, but I'd go with an Aquas Bakugan that kind of can, maybe change its mode, kind of an offensive Bakugan. And also a Subterra Bakugan, a kind of a hybrid attack-defense Bakugan. So the idea I'm going for here is that you can have an Aquas Bakugan kind of tied together the Griff brothers, since, Leonis and Falco are owned by brothers, and Aquas could kind of be a secondary attribute for both of them. I think that'd be kind of cool. And then for, Leonis, you have a Darkest Bakugan in there, Falco, a Subterra Bakugan, so they do have, something different there, but still. I just think it'd be cool to have like an Aquas Bakugan, well, Aquas Bakugan in general, to kind of tie them together in that sense. Now we have the Wind deck, which I would immediately rename to the Hager deck for Hacker Daguma. So this is a weird case because this is another deck that's kind of meant to be a group, not like a main Bakugan with two just kind of deck fillers. So I think changing the main Bakugan isn't a huge deal here, and this would make the deck owned by, well, I guess technically Hacker Daguma, which would be important because this would go as a Subterra deck effectively, the main Bakugan being Subterra. Aside from that, this would be the same. We have Windmill in here, also Daguerrotis. Interestingly, Hacker Daguma was the only Bakugan in this deck to get its own release, which is usually reserved for the main Bakugan of the deck, but that wasn't Windmill, so it's already kind of an awkward situation with Hacker Daguma there anyway, so make the main Bakugan, you get technically a Subterra deck out of it, and with that, you could then put the Subterra cross piece into this deck, which I think would be really, really nice, so I think you kind of come full circle with that. And yeah, I wouldn't have any of these Sextagonal pieces in boosters, all of them would be in decks. Speaking of, let's get to our last deck for BakuTech Season 1. And for the final deck, we'd have the Gift deck. This would be, in my opinion, the best way to end off BakuTech Season 1. I think Tatsuya should have gotten his own deck, with Gift Shinryu as the main Bakugan. This would be a weird case because I wouldn't want it to be similar to the promo version, although you could maybe make some alterations. You make it closer like the, boost version we got later instead of the promo one. That's fine. Regardless, I think you should have gotten, metal cross pieces here. I think that would have been really cool. The second Bakugan here would be Twin Dobru. Twin Dobru did release as a booster. It could stay like that, that's fine. You can give it metal if you want to. If not, understandable, but you could just get a re-release in here, honestly, that's fine. But for the third Bakugan, Sextavinal. Now you could keep this to, a little bit different, so instead of having Sextavinal be the same as the, promo version, I think what you could do instead is make it the same, but for the cross pieces, make them silver instead of white. Kind of just meant, they act as pieces that you're meant to swap out with metal. They have the same kind of general color of gray, or silver, whatever I say. It would work. And the other thing is, it would look the exact same, but it would be locked to Chaos. Sextavinal is technically Chaos, or at least that's like the closest attribute you could really assign to it. So what I would do is just lock to Chaos. That would make it to where the kind of other attributes, or also, the kind of, changing attribute version of Sextavinal, the promo version would be locked to all the promo version. If they don't want to re-release it here, I think that would be a perfectly fair way to do it. And with that, you then have your Sextavinal that you can swap out the parts of. Speaking of, well, this would be where I'd put the, Aqua Soul piece. Put it in here. That also kind of gives you an idea of what you're supposed to do, because you have the one part that you can swap out from Sextavinal's, plastic pieces, and if you had all 6 decks, then you get your complete Sextavinal by just buying the decks, because you get the pieces and Sextavinal itself. I think this would be the ideal way to go about this, and it would have been so much cooler if you bought all 6 decks and just had Sextavinal instead of having to go through like a weird promo thing, which I never liked, and also having to get like, technically 3 decks, not the 4 they had, and then also like 3 boosters. I just think having all 6 decks, each one has a piece, the last one is Sextavinal. I think this just would have been a better way to go about it, and I think it would have been so much cooler. Now to give some setup. So for BakuTech Gachi, I want to kind of mirror what I did here. So if you notice, I had 8 decks in Season 1. Again, discounting the Champion deck, that's its own thing. But anyway, there were 8 decks, alright? Also, there were 6 decks, that were kind of attribute-based. You had a kind of main Bakugan for each attribute, and then they're kind of mixed, Each deck had multiple different attributes in it, but the main Bakugan represents, one of the 6 attributes, but then the 2 extra decks were either Mono Pyrus or Mono Darkus. You see, like the Rise Second Hollow deck being Mono Pyrus and Mono Darkus, with, the Dragon deck, and the Shadow deck being a mixed Pyrus and mixed Darkus, kind of like the other attribute decks that are all mixed. And lastly, the final deck of the line was kind of a special deck. I want to mirror this in BakuTech Gachi, and I think this is how, again, they should have done it, so let's go ahead and explain these decks. The Go deck would be the exact same. It would just be the Aquas deck, and that's it. The Dragon deck would also be the exact same. This would just be our Mono Pyrus deck. The Jaiba deck is also the same, just being the Subterra deck. The Sanzu deck would, again, be the same, being our Mixed Darkest deck. And now I could finally stop talking like a robot, because we have something new. So we'd have the Ogre deck, so yeah. I would break up the Griff deck. We don't need, Ogre Lenos Lashao Falco in the same deck. Break it up, make 2 separate decks. So this first one here would be our Chaos deck, the Ogre deck. This would of course feature Ogre Lenos as we saw it, but also you'd have a couple new background in here. I would kind of just mimic the Shield deck, so you kind of have an offensive Darkest Bakugan, although hopefully this time without a awkward ridge that kind of makes it worse, but anyway. And a defensive Aquas Bakugan. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, so there you go, that'd be kind of what I would do for the Ogre deck. And now for the Lashao deck. So this would be the other part of the Griff deck, and this would be our Ventus deck. So again, you'd have Lashao Falco, but also Gunicarus. As I stated in the Tri deck, I would have a mode-changing Aquas Bakugan, which would kind of tie into Gunicarus. They wouldn't have to be like evolutions or anything, it'd just be kind of cool to keep the same concept. Speaking of, I would then have kind of a hybrid attack defense Subterra Bakugan in here as well, again, referencing back to the Tri deck that I made up for, this Lashao deck. And now we have the Zeta deck. This one was the inspiration for this entire video, because I am still mad, it's been like a decade, but I am still mad that we never had a Zeta deck. Because guess what? I would have bought it back in 2015, I would have spent like $140 to get this thing. That would have been awesome. But no, they put it in a booster, and unfortunately, 15-year-old me thought $25 for one Bakugan was too expensive, and the well, as I just stated how much I spent on this thing, it didn't exactly turn out great. But anyways, the Zeta deck. I think regardless of my own trauma, this should have had a deck. I don't get why it didn't. I guess you would say like Trifalco didn't get a deck in Season 1, and then Zeta Municus doesn't get a deck in Gachi, but I feel like that's stupid. They both should have just gotten decks. They should have made a Zeta deck. If you have Zeta Municus as is, this would be, you know, the Bakugan, the main Bakugan of the Zeta deck. This could also act as our Mono Darkus deck. This one, you could just straight up make evolutions to Shinaz-Chi and Michael Laurel. You don't have to, but it'd be really cool to make Shinaz-Chi into like a tanky, you know, defensive Bakugan, maybe with some like cross pieces like on the lower parts of the Bakugan. That'd be cool. And for Michael Laurel, you could keep it tall, maybe not as tall, but you can keep it tall, but have the neck be like extremely powerful in its springs, because I think that'd be like a cool attacker. Also give it like a cross piece or two just to make it a little bit heavier. I think it'd be cool to like have the same base ideas as those two, but instead of making them absolutely terrible, make them actually like, you know, decent. That'd be cool. Because you're kind of closely following the concept, you could make them evolutions, but you don't necessarily have to. You can just make them their own new Bakugan. Regardless, it'd be fine. I just really wish there was a Zeta deck, and I'm still very upset, both, again, personally, and also just like, why wasn't there? There just should have been. So, man, a Zeta deck would have been so great. Never understood this one. And for our final deck, we would have the Maid deck. This would be kind of our special deck for BakuTech Gachi. Also, not only the final deck of Gachi, but just the final deck in general. This would be our mixed Pyrus deck. And also, the first deck from Season 1, the Dragon deck. That was a mixed Pyrus deck as well, so it would also end on the same note. I think that's kind of cool. As far as the Bakugan go, the main Bakugan, of course, would be Maid Last Boss. I think this would have been a really, really cool Bakugan to have it, you know, its own deck, but also, like, this would be, like, the final thing of BakuTech Gachi. I think ending on a deck would have been, like, really cool. So, Maid Last Boss would be in there. As far as the other Bakugan go, I would have a blue Diacitic, the same one we saw, like, in the random packs, the 700G one. Plus, it'd have its black Savik with 220Gs. Just grab that recolor and put it into this deck. I think that'd be really cool. But also, Bone Skulls. Make a red Bone Skulls and make it 700Gs. Also, make sure it's, you know, Gate card would be in this deck. But anyway, this would just kind of be a final, like, cool Zakuro deck, which, again, that'd just be great. But anyway, you know how cool it'd be to end on a deck that has Maid Last Boss plus a blue Diacitic and a red Bone Skulls? Like that? Come on. That'd be, like, actually perfect. So, yeah, I think this would just have been a really nice deck. It's probably, like, the least likely of anything here. Obviously, all these aren't possible since, you know, BakuTech's been over for over a decade, but had they maybe decided on making some of these, I think I could see a Tri-deck or a Zeta deck, even a Gift deck over this thing, but I just thought this concept was a little bit too cool to pass up on, so, yeah. Well, anyways, that's the video. I don't know, I just thought it'd be cool because some of these deck choices, or I guess lack thereof, always bothered me. I just want to make a video to talk about these and what I would have done. Now again, this whole video is completely irrelevant and makes absolutely no sense because the line's been over for, well, over a decade. That said, if any time travelers happen to be watching and are former employees, or I guess current employees, I don't care, of Sega Toys, if you can go back in time and like fix this, that'd be great. Maybe that's, you know, impossible, but I could dream. Anyways, that's all I gotta say for this video. I thought it was interesting to talk about some of these decks and some maybe minor improvements they could have made, but also just some, you know, new ones I think they should have had. But yeah, anyways, that's all. So thanks for watching, and bye-bye.